Welcome to another episode of Fresh Off the Set. I am Sarah Jenkins.
And I'm Brooke Mangum. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I'm going to say a word that is very polarizing. And you're either going to love it, cringe, hate it, but the word influencer. What comes to your mind, Sarah, when I say that?
Oh my goodness. It's everywhere. Influencers have just become part of our stratosphere, part of our world the past, 10 years? It's relatively recent, but I feel like you're right. You hit the nail on the head. It's just... People have a lot of feelings about influencers,
cringy.
right? You think it's cringy? Like, how do you feel?
It's cringy. Even because I started on Instagram at its beginning, right? So before the algorithms were designed to make you not have followers. So I have followers from way back in the day. So
it was the Wild West back then, right?
Yeah, it's so different, but it's like something where people, that's somebody's job, right? Is an influencer. And it always gives me a little bit of a cringe. But here in Utah, we have a ton of influencers.
We do. I have now lived here a couple years. I'm not from here originally, but I've noticed, there's a lot of beautiful people here, a lot of creatives, but you just see influencers everywhere, and it makes you how do you define that?
I don't think anybody actually knows. At least that's what I thought until I saw this interview where a PhD is actually going to be breaking down interviews. Her name is Mariah Wellman.
Yes,
and she's
thank you, Mariah.
Studied this she has a very interesting perspective about how influencers can be a great thing to empower women, like stay-at-home moms that are looking for an outlet, they're looking for a job, they're looking for a way to connect with the outside world. Because as being a mom, you can feel like you're just I'm trapped alone with these kids.
Yes, the days, the hours can stretch on, and the
adult
panic sets
conversations. What? I'm anything but baby shark. So that's what really we're diving into this with this interview. They're going to be breaking down what is an influencer and how that can be empowering, and also just the repercussions of social media and everything like that. So buckle up, sit back and listen while we all get educated. Here we go. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, I know I say I'm excited about every podcast interview, and I seriously mean this today because this topic is so fascinating to me. We are going to chat with Mariah Wellman. She's a technology influence and wellness researcher. She's an assistant professor of communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she has done some fascinating work when it comes to influencers. Mariah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here.
Oh, right. I am so excited to talk about this because in Utah, we're pretty much the land of influencers, as some say. So
Absolutely.
Before we get to that, talk to us about your educational career. You taught at the University of Utah while getting your PhD, and where you're teaching now. Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I started out going to school in journalism and mass communication, and I was in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa, so I went to Iowa State for my undergrad, went to Iowa for my master's degree, and then was lucky enough to get an offer from the University of Utah, and I had actually never been there before. And so I kind of came in with this outsider perspective, and the people at the University of Utah and just in Salt Lake City in general were so kind and wonderful to me. And I really wanted to explore kind of what was going on toward the west side of the United States. And so I went to the University of Utah, and then I was able to teach classes there and pursue my research interests. And I felt really lucky and blessed to be there in the presence of so many incredible researchers. And then I graduated this past May, so it would have been May of 2022, with my PhD in the Department of Communication there, and then was offered this incredible job in wellness and tech at UIC, the University of Illinois at Chicago. And so we moved to Chicago, and here we are. And now I teach kind of wellness, technology, digital influence. I teach all kinds of classes here and continue to do this research. And it's been a really wonderful experience. And I feel really lucky to have had the training that I've had, and now being able to take what I've learned in the state of Utah and produce research over here in Chicago.
We love that you loved Utah.
I really did. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't really know anything about Utah before I came, and I had an incredible experience there. And I actually am coming back in April to visit, and I told people I might cry when I land because I loved it so much. It was great.
We love to hear that. And like we said at the very beginning, we have many influencers here, and you actually studied influencers and social media. Why did you decide to study that? I mean, it's a very interesting topic, but why did you decide?
I think I, let's see, I was, I think, in the prime age of consumerism and consumption of influencer content when it first started. So think maybe like 2010s, 2012, when Instagram first started and Instagram models and influencers started coming about. I was just finishing high school and starting my undergrad. And so I was kind of the prime audience for a lot of these creators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I, along with a lot of people in like 2014, 2015, 2016, wanted to try and do that also. And so I actually tried to be an influencer, and I realized I knew nothing about the industry. Like a lot of people, I think I just started throwing things up on my Instagram, hoping that people would like it.
With heavily filtered images. I remember that the
yeah.
most when Instagram came out. That was the big
Yes.
thing. Everyone was like, how'd
Yes.
you get your picture to look like that?
Oh yeah. And so that was kind of where I started. And I graduated with my undergraduate degree in journalism. I went out and worked as a journalist for a while. And I was talking to some people, and they're like, if you really like influencer culture, there are people out there who are starting to study these people. And I was like, well, maybe if I, am not really falling in love with being a content creator, maybe I could start to study and track the industry. So I left my job, and in 2016, I started my master's degree and met some really incredible people, was introduced to some early influencer scholars. At that point, there were only a handful of people here in the United States who were studying influencer culture from a way that I wanted to, which was not necessarily surveys and generalized information, but sort of these narratives of how do creators get started? How do they decide what to do? And I started just interviewing and observing influencers from all across the country. And so then when I got this offer at Utah, I was like, you know what? I don't know much about Utah, but on my visit, everyone was like, there are so many influencers here. And I was like, what? There are a lot of influencers here? Like, what do you mean? And so I started doing research, and it turns out so many of like the OG influencers who started really early were from Utah, and a lot of them still lived there. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I can come here and study this. I can meet a bunch of people. And so I decided I was going to go in this direction, and it still is new. But at this point now, I've been studying for 7 years, and there's so many more researchers too. And it's a great little community that we have. And so, yeah, that's kind of the long story of how I got into this, but it's cool. I think a lot of people still don't realize, like, you can get a PhD studying.
I had no idea.
Culture. It's like the most fun degree ever.
I love it. I love it. Okay. And so you said, we've both talked, Utah is like a breeding ground for influencers. Based on your research, why do you think that is? Do you think religion has something to do with it? Why do you think there are so many in, the beautiful state of Utah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. For some reason, I'm seeing this correlation between specifically the LDS church and influencer culture. And I don't always necessarily want to call it the LDS church, but I would say LDS culture that starts in the church and then bleeds out outward, right? And so it's these ideas about womanhood. And I've talked, to quite a few people that talk about how, in LDS culture, when you are younger, people are talking to you about what it means to be a woman and a mother and a wife and all the things that you must do to stay home and care for your family and be a sort of homemaker in a way that really glorifies their beliefs. And so we were seeing a lot of women who were able to do that sort of thing, and also to be able to make money from home. Right. So not only did they really take an interest in braiding hair, for example, I had this really great anecdote from a creator that talked about how growing up, her mom always taught her to take pride in her hair. And she learned really early on how to do all these really cool braids. And so she started being a braiding influencer.
I remember, I don't know if we're thinking of the same influencer, but I remember one of the influencers that started, she was like the girl with the braids. I remember it very well.
Yes, yes. And so I think they were able to kind of capitalize on some of these pieces of LDS culture that sort of moved outward away from the church and it bled really into Utah culture, right? Because I think a lot of people um, who are not LDS are very, very successful at blogging because they're able to take on these aspects of LDS culture and lifestyles and apply it to their aesthetic, right? So we're
Yeah.
seeing these beautiful women who are putting their children and their families first while keeping this beautiful aesthetic home, right? They look great, they take care of themselves. We see a ton of influencers who are LDS. They're in fashion and lifestyle and beauty and even health and fitness, right? Like the entire Rachel Parcell and her entire family, for example, right? They're some of the OG influencers. And a lot of the siblings, right? Rachel's really into fashion. Her sister is really into fitness and now has started that IVL clothing line as well as a boutique fitness space, right? And I think that there's, this really interesting connection between the ideals that LDS women are taught, how it bleeds into Utah culture, and then how they're able to kind of apply that to the online space. I think we started really early with bloggers, and as soon as women could realize that they could do the things they normally do, take photos, keep memories of their family, right, through this digital means, and then also make money and provide, a financial future that is strong and stable for their family. I think it just made perfect sense for a lot of them.
This research is so fascinating to me. So you talked about some of, like you said, the original influencers. A lot of them came from here and they're still doing really well. How do you think, like someone who's maybe just starting now, they're seeing this, they're like, oh, I want to be an influencer. I feel like everyone in some point is like, yeah, that's me. How do social media influencers best build and then maintain credibility? Because some of these people have been around we're coming on like a decade. How do you build and do that?
Yeah, so I think a big part of why some of the OG influencers were really successful and continue to be successful is because they were able to capitalize on this industry when it was not saturated.
Right.
And what we're seeing now is there's so many more people who want to follow, in the OG footsteps, if you will. And so I think a lot of these people who are new to the influencer space, they have to find other ways to differentiate themselves. And we're seeing from an audience perspective, a lot of followers want influencers who know what they're talking about and can not only talk the talk but walk the walk, right? And so we're seeing these people who are really interested in not only authenticity but, like you said, credibility as well. And my research looks a lot at these initial concepts that come from mass communication research. I've applied them to the influencer industry, and so what we see is they want expertise, right? And that can be through certifications and degrees, but it can also be through their anecdotal knowledge. So those influencers who have grown up in these spaces where, taking care of yourself was really championed and being a great mother was really championed, and they're able to utilize their anecdotal knowledge about that, right? Their generational knowledge to apply that to their content. And then trust. And so the way that influencers are able to show trust along with attractiveness, which I like to call it likability or similarity, right? So we've got a lot of these successful influencers, women especially, are gaining followers because followers can see themselves in that particular influencer.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
Yeah. And so those three primary concepts, at a certain point, you have to learn how to balance those. And there are certain influencers, for example, those in health and fitness, who might need a little bit more expertise and a little bit less, similarity, or a little bit more trust and less expertise, right? There's not a perfect formula, but having a piece of each of those can really help to build your credibility. And then it's about maintaining that over a long time period, right? It's about being as consistent as you possibly can be.
I was going to say, you said that word. I feel like anytime I talk to someone, like I was at an event where Rachel Parcell spoke, and one of the things she said was consistency. And you hear that all the time, but that really seems to be one of the keys to build and maintain that credibility.
It's huge. And it's hard over time because, right, a lot of these creators start really young, and it's normal to grow up and to change and to become interested in other things. And it's a lot of pressure, I think, for people to maintain that over time because the audience came to you for one thing, and maybe you have been, around since the beginning of Rachel Parcell, and now it's 10 years down the line, she has kids and a husband, and she's changing the way that she's doing things, and some people are happy about that and other people are not. And so it can be kind of difficult for them to stay in the spotlight and be consistent, especially just as their lives outside of social media change.
Right. Okay. So we've already started talking about change, which leads me into my next question. I mean, you and I talked at the beginning of Instagram when it was just pictures.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok came in the last few years. Things have been changing. How have you seen influencers and content change over the last few years? And what do you think the future is going to look like?
Yeah. So those are really great questions. And I think it's really important to talk about them because we see influencer culture as this new thing and we knew it as one way. And as things are changing, right? Influencers and audiences want to know, like, where's it going to go from here? And are we still going to be able to create and consume the content that we want to see? And so what I've seen, the biggest, piece of evidence is influencers are so incredibly adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
They can change their content to whatever platforms and whatever kind of our technology sector is moving them toward. And so you started with blogging, right, which was this really long form content people sat down and read, similarly to how they would, magazines and books. And then we saw Instagram, where it became quicker to scroll, and now
Mm-hmm.
TikTok, where you don't even have to find people. They just show up on your For You page and you just scroll. Right? Like, it's amazing. We had to type in a URL and now all of a sudden I open my phone and I can just have content basically hitting me in the face.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of those people. I still love a good blog. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can sit here and read this. But I'm part of the older blogging generation, I guess you could say. But you're exactly right. TikTok, you open it up and it's like, we found this video for you. Would you like to see?
Right. And so I think we're seeing this more algorithmic driven content, which is, another topic for another day. I think the algorithm is such an interesting topic when you talk about influencer culture. But I think also we're seeing this increase in short form content. So can you get your information out in a short, concise way that you're still able to connect to your people?
Mm-hmm.
I also think the biggest change in the last, I would say, 3 years has been influencers being more willing to share about their personal and political beliefs, as they know it will alienate followers. But it seems like followers are asking for influencers to be more open about what they believe so that the followers can, see themselves even more closely aligned with the follower or with the influencers rather that they are really interested in, which I think before politics, and religion and stuff was kind of a topic that wasn't talked about as frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now it's really, starting to come to the forefront and be one of the major indicators of who has what followers, for example. Right. And that really matters. And I think the future of influence and influencing really, I think influencers will continue to find ways to increase their credibility and continue to find ways to diversify their content so that it doesn't look like everybody else's.
Right.
And I think also influencers are really looking for financial stability. They know that platforms are not the best option. We're seeing a lot of legislation being pushed toward platforms like TikTok and trying to get them removed, right, from the state to the country to even just universities looking to, shut down our access to TikTok. I think that creators are realizing that, the algorithm is sometimes not allowing their content to be seen by the maximum amount of people. And so they're trying to figure out what businesses can we open. I think Utah specifically, we've got some incredible influencers in the state of Utah who are working this, entrepreneurial angle and utilizing the followers that they've built up over time to create these long-lasting businesses that they have control over, which I think is really smart. And I think we'll see that in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a couple of influencers right now off the top of my head that have brands that are so well known, like Amber Fillerup with her hair brand. She was the one I was thinking about when you said braids. Carol Lewin has her fitness, Rachel Parcell. I mean, they all have these businesses that they own. And that's so interesting that you find that's going to be a trend in the future. So speaking of the future, I have heard some people say, and I'm so excited to hear your take on this. Some people say that it's an influencer bubble and it's going to pop and they're not going to exist. Do you foresee a future where influencers cease to exist, where it is not a form of marketing, it is not a job, the bubble's popped, there's no room? Do you think that's going to happen?
No, I do not. And sometimes that opinion can make people upset, and I will gladly debate people on it. But I
go
don't think
for
so.
it, girl.
I think, here's the thing. I think that, and I get that same kind of comment when people are like, nobody cares about influencers. I get it from my own industry. I get, faculty and other researchers who are like, why does this matter? Why are you studying this? And my comment is, there will always be influencers because there are always people who are influenceable. The reason influencers exist is because people want information. And also, I might add, influencers have existed in various forms for hundreds of years.
Oh,
When
I
teach my
absolutely
undergraduates-
agree with you. I mean, think
Yeah,
about Audrey Hepburn influenced
Right.
how many people? I have her eyebrows.
Right, exactly. And I even told people, I joke and laugh, and my undergrads are always like, oh my gosh. But I talk about how some of the very first influencers were actually in ancient Greece.
Oh,
They just moved in a different medium, right? Like digital influencers, sure, they may not exist in the same format in the future, but there will always be people, there will always be opinion leaders that we as a society look toward to figure out how we're supposed to live our lives, what products we want to buy, what habits, what ideologies, what beliefs that we're into. I think they just take different forms. So maybe this space of traditional sponsored content may not exist. However, I think there will be always people who are utilizing technology in very interesting ways that will continue to, perpetuate influencer culture. And as it shifts and changes over time, I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, because I think there are still people who consume the content. And as long as there are influenceable people, there will be influencers.
I honestly love that answer, because I know so many people, like, they dream of that, that financial freedom, being on their own, doing what they want. And honestly, a lot of the stuff I follow is influencers, because I either see myself in them, or like you said, they're really knowledgeable, and I go to that. Like, I crave that kind of content.
Yes, I think that will continue for a long time to come. And like I said, I think that it may change, and we'll see as influencers start to adapt what content will look like and what social media will look like. But I think that they will be around for a long time to come.
All right, so let's talk about, so we've talked about the influencers a lot. I could talk to you for seriously hours. You also study the rhetoric of wellness on social media, which I think is fascinating. What does that exactly mean? What have you discovered in your research? Tell me all the things.
Yeah, so there have been some really wonderful people that I have started to look at, and by people I mean scholars and researchers who are strictly kind of in this wellness space. And what I was realizing is everybody is talking about wellness, right? Everybody is trying to increase their wellness or restore their wellness or enhance it. And I think that's a product of the society that we're living in now, post 2020, post COVID. I think people are really concerned with their overall well-being, and wellness is having a moment, you could say.
Yes.
Right. And so I think I was trying to figure out, why is that? And I studied, influencers who were in health and fitness and wellness. And I realized I think we're underestimating how influencer culture and creators in general are impacting the wellness industry. And so I started looking at, how do these popular online users explain what it means to be well? And then how does that kind of seep outward and kind of infiltrate the minds of people who are even not on social media? So when someone says, this is the green juice that you need to detox your body, and then all of a sudden everybody is utilizing this green juice, right?
Yes.
Did that come from, right? Did that come from an expert source? Was that just a random, piece of information that came from someone who is not credible at all? And does that even matter, right? When everybody just starts doing it anyway. And I think we're seeing these trends starting on social media that have to do with wellness that just kind of seep into everything. And then you get mass media who's covering this space. And so I started looking at and seeing if I could argue that social media influencers are changing the wellness industry. And I think that I can. That's kind of my next really big project, which is, how are wellness influencers changing the way that we as a society think about what it means to be healthy, to be well, to be fit, and who is that helping and who is that harming?
Yeah, I think that's fabulous, because I love following wellness accounts, but sometimes I feel like it is out of control, because I have someone telling me, like you said, to drink this green juice, and someone telling me this advice, and then someone goes against them, and I'm like, wait, are they professionals? Am I listening to this? It's just such an interesting space.
Yes, and there's no regulation, right? So we have in our society traditional health experts like physicians and things like that, and mental health experts, right? They have rules and regulations as to what they can and can't say online and how they can treat patients. But when it comes to health and wellness influencers, there are no regulations. The only regulation that we have here in the United States came from 2015 that says if you work with a brand, you have to disclose the partnership. But they don't have to disclose their expertise. They don't have to say, hey, I'm not a doctor. I think anecdotally, some people are, but some people aren't. And I don't know that all followers understand where the information is coming from and whether or not they should apply it to their own lives.
I am going to be so fascinated when you finish this research. Okay, Maria, we are almost out of time. I think my last question for you would be, so this is a common question I get asked all the time. I do a lot of content